Why did Russian troops move their forces northwest of Bakhmut? Certainly not to launch an attack on Slavyansk, as Russian sources say. They are nowhere near in condition to even mention it. They need Mankivka, or to be more precise, the heights in the vicinity of this village. But the nuance is that the enemy units were defeated in the area of Rakovo-Vasilivka. After all, 4 kilometers of open and shot by the Ukrainian side space along the route MO3 made themselves felt, having exhausted the main offensive resource of the forward units. Now they need compensation for losses and restoration of combat capability. And this is not even the battle for the settlement itself. But the important point is that by moving to the northwest, the invaders dispersed their resources, instead of concentrating them on a single location or direction. This dispersal made it possible to wear down their forces and resources, which are now insufficient to put pressure on the northern location of Bakhmut. Which means an urgent supply of meat is needed. But the command of the Russian troops at the current level of mobilization cannot compensate for the losses in the combat zone. In fact, this was confirmed today by Andrei Yusov, a spokesman for the Ukrainian intelligence service, noting that the Russian side is now mobilizing up to 20,000 recruits per month. This information makes it possible to assess the capabilities of the occupation troops to restore the combat effectiveness of their units, taking into account both daily and monthly losses. I have repeatedly stressed that this figure of monthly compensation is 50,000. This figure includes both liquidated, wounded, prisoners of war and rotational compensation in the Russian army. In other words, the monthly mobilization resource of 20,000 for the enemy is effective only for compensation of irretrievable losses, but no more than that. Thus, unless another mobilization is announced in Russia in the near future, they will be reduced by 30,000 to 40,000 troops each month. But, the interesting thing, is that if they start to build up mobilization capacity again, the loss rate will also increase. This is due to the fact that while the mobilization resources needed to compensate the enemy are growing, their quality is losing. At the same time, opportunities for their provision and staffing are decreasing day by day. And if tomorrow they start mobilizing 50 to 100,000 in Russia, it will be an army of naked and barefoot soldiers. Of course I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm talking about. In fact, 20,000 is the resource that the Russian command can more or less provide in a month. With more, they are guaranteed the crisis of logistical support, and another increase in losses, which will need to be compensated by more mobilization. This is such an Ouroboros of human resources for the Russian troops. All this leads to another meat waves, and without artillery support. The prospect for the occupiers is simply terrifying in some directions. For example, a representative of the General Staff of the AFU reports that the enemy practically does not engage in counter-battery warfare. This happened thanks to the supply of long-range artillery by Ukraine's allies. Unable to respond adequately to it, the invaders were forced to move their own artillery away from the front line, too far to hit the artillery of the AFU. This is a stroke of the entire system. And the other day another of the occupiers' collaborators was liquidated, who created a torture chamber for veterans and pro-Ukrainian activists in the Kherson region. My point is that those who follow the information space closely may see a connection in some of the events. Usually the collaborators begin to say goodbye to the world of the living so actively when a Ukrainian counteroffensive is approaching. And the traitors have no one to hope for. The Russian side, even in the occupied territories, cannot protect anyone,